So let's go ahead and start by opening the wizard. So I'm going to just get the link and then share it with you. Okay. Put that on the chat. So we're going to open up this URL. And we're going to take that PDF that you all have now and put it on. You can just drag and drop it right onto this little drag and drop file upload area. Make sure everybody is able to get to this screen. Raise your hand if you've been able to get to that screen and if you have your file uploaded, ready to go. Next step. Okay. And if you need a minute, raise your hand if you just still need one more minute. Okay. So again, this PDF is on the Slack for our class. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and click continue now. And we don't need to go into the details of how we're going to fill in all of these fields, but let's think through what we're going to do. So this title here is asking us for what's going to show in the, the title here and the title here in our browser window. So I think military affidavit might be just fine. I would probably do it title case, because it is the title. And that's going to be, this is a form that's very likely to be used by an attorney, but maybe a pro se person is going to use it too. But this is the way it's going to be referred to by the clerk who says, hey, don't forget to fill in your military affidavit. That's exactly what they're going to refer to it as. So under description, I might write something that explains what the form is about. Description, this field here, what I type is going to be shown as the second screen that the user sees when they're clicking through the interview. I'm going to say something like about why and how to use this form. So something like use this form. I haven't standardized on the term here, interview, form, app, but let's just say form. Use this online form to complete a military affidavit to comply with the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Now, the next question here helps when people have to choose how to fill in the case caption part here. So remember, we were asked for a court, department, and county. And I'm going to say right here what courts this can be used in. So what should I be selecting here? Joseph, I think, or Mark, you had noticed something about that, right? So what's going to be the right selection for the allowed courts here?
What do you mean allowed courts? Or
yeah, so this court, when we say the allowed courts here, it's going to narrow down the scope of what courts the form can be used in. So what's going to be the right selection?
I guess BMC, or
what's your intuition about that based on what we talked about when we looked at the form and our discussion here?
I'm sorry if I missed like the context, but did you give us like a situation or a person who's filling it out, or?
Yeah, so when we talked about like what courts it can be used in, so what do you, and we talked a little bit about.
Oh, we talked about probate and family court, and we talked about land court. I guess housing court as well, district court, superior court. I guess everything besides juvenile.
And
juvenile.
Maybe even juvenile court. Actually, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not sure if there would be a case where you would use this in juvenile, but maybe sometimes some kinds of cases involve touch on custody, or that would be involved in juvenile court, right? Like a child requiring assistance case, for example, might touch on juvenile court still. So yeah, all the courts. That's really all we're trying to get to. It can be used in all the courts, so we know that. And then for categories, I think we could just check all the categories too. I think maybe not immigration, but even then, the kinds of immigration cases that get decided in the Massachusetts trial court, maybe they'd still touch on those issues. Okay, we don't have to check other. We can leave that unchecked. This label right here is just used internally in the YAML file that we generate, the one that has the instructions for DocAssemble. And it kind of gets put at the beginning of our variable names to identify that they're specific to this form. So you can use whatever thing you want here for the label, but military underscore affidavit's actually, I think, a pretty good placeholder. So let's leave that as it is. And we'll skip the link to original form. That's not used anywhere yet. And it's not too important for us to do this exercise. So let's click continue. What about interview roles? So it says here, for this military affidavit form, is the user typically the plaintiff or the defendant? So what do you think would be the right selection here?
I feel like it could be both.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Now this screen here is probably the most overwhelming one. But what we're doing is we're going through and we're going to be able to have a chance to say for each of the fields on the form, and you may not see those labels, but hopefully they make sense. And I can show them so that you can see them. You would want to be doing this side by side probably with your PDF editor, Adobe Acrobat Professional, at the same time. So let's do that. Let's do that side by side. And I'm just going to take a look here and see the form labels. Okay, so I'm going through these and saying what type of field each field is. And then I can give a little bit of a hint for how that field should be shown on the screen. For example, this is a big text area where people can put multiple lines of information. And this is just a single line input. So that's one of the kinds of differences I can say right here when I'm doing this process here, going through all the labels. So court department is the first one. Let's find it on our list of fields here. I know this is the part that you're going to be simulating in your head a little bit, but just so you can see where it is on the form. It's this box right here, court department. So court underscore department is probably actually just fine as a label. And it's going to be a text field. There's a little trick for what we can do to make that a little bit more efficient. But for now, that's just fine. What about parties are serving? Let's look at that. Let's find it on the form. It's a checkbox. The following parties are currently in military service. So we get to describe how we want that to look on a DocAssemble interview. Like what would be the prompt? That's what we're looking about here. We're looking for the prompt that's shown for that variable, which is a checkbox, true or false. What do you think would be a good prompt maybe for that?
Would it be, are the parties currently serving in military service as defined by Service Members Civil Relief Act?
It might get a little bit long, but I think I like the first part of that. So one of the parties is currently serving in the military. That's going to be a yes or no kind of input. We get to here, serving parties. This is that big text area. So it may be a good prompt for the person to fill in this part of the form. Yeah, Brianna.
The names of the parties who are serving.
Okay. And we get a choice here for the type of input, the top level one, and we have text, yes, no, and area. So what do people think between text and area? What might be a good choice for us to make here?
I believe it's area, right? Because it gets more space.
I think so. I think that's right. I think that'll be a lot easier to use.
What is
Yeah.
what is the difference? What is area?
Ashley, what's your sense?
So I think the text is like one line and then the area is like a box. You can just keep going, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, so let's mirror this. We have parties not serving, which is this little checkbox here. And we just had parties are serving. What be a good label that mirrors the meaning here? We started out by saying one of the parties is currently serving in the military for the first text area. What would be a good prompt for this?
One of the parties is not currently serving in the military.
Yeah, because that's what checks this box that tells us to even look at the list of names here. So I think that's a very good short prompt. Okay.
So should it be like, do you think the one of the parties could be misleading because it could be more than one who's currently not serving?
What would be a good way to rephrase it, do you think?
Names of parties who are currently not serving in the military.
So it's a checkbox. That may not work as well for a checkbox.
True, because that would be for the data.
Do parties are not currently serving in the military? Yes or no checkbox?
One or more of the parties, possibly.
I like that solution. Or maybe even at least one.
Could I ask, is there a reason that we're not phrasing this as a question with a question mark at the end? Is that because of the way it's going to look in the interview, or?
Oh, good question. Yeah, so that's a really good point. We have different ways to phrase these kind of yes, no questions. We could either have it be a checkbox that someone clicks, in which case you want it to be affirmative. And you want it to be like you check it when it's true. In that case is what I would, just to be more clear. Or we can make it show as yes, no radio buttons where people have to choose yes or no. In which case we would totally, Aaron, you're right, want to make it be phrased like a question. We don't necessarily have to choose that now. We want to have a good placeholder. But I do like this phrasing for now as our placeholder. I think that's a good catch. Let's go through the next fields a little bit quicker because I want to go through some of the other things and I want to let people experiment with this a little bit too. Because we are hitting 3. I'd like to give you a break. Let's finish this screen before we do that. Okay. So we have not serving parties. Again, let's just parallel that from the description we already gave. Names of parties who are not currently serving in the military. We have unsure. And let's mirror that. So first there's the checkbox. And actually I missed the checkbox, so that's not there. That's something to keep an eye on later. We'll have to go back and fix this. That's actually very realistic. You can see here the checkbox is not actually a field you can interact with. I'm going to skip ahead to this one that we can do. Which is the names. Really clunky the way I'm writing it now, but that's okay for a placeholder. An important reason to get these names right is thinking about, like, can I even remember what I was trying to say later when I'm trying to use this and to tweak it? So again, unsure, this is a data, it's going to be an area. And actually, I don't think I did that change here for the list of people who are not serving. That should be an area too. We can change that later. This is kind of just a placeholder. Okay. Now we get to facts. Facts, again, a big area of text. So we're going to make it a text area as the type of input. And BBO is left as a single text field. So we obviously have a bunch of fields on this form that we didn't get asked about. Anyone have any guess why? Lenny, do you want to explain a little bit about what happens if we haven't filled those? Why we're not asked about those in the wizard?
To be completely honest, I'm not sure. Like maybe the wizard just didn't read it, or it's already like in the code. I don't remember.
Yeah, so it's the second point that you're making about it being in the code. That's kind of the trick here. So this tool was built totally for this project where we're filing forms with the court. So because we already know we're going to ask about things like courts, docket numbers, plaintiffs, and a user of the form, a person who's actually sitting and typing in information, we want to keep those questions consistent. They're always asked the same way, or at least we default to asking them the same way. So we don't bother to make the person who's using this tool to say how they want those questions to be asked. They can go and customize it later. But they don't have to do it when they're running this tool. So let's go ahead and click continue. And now what we're doing is we're going through and we're coming up with both an order of questions that we're starting with as a default, and we're coming up with the wording of each screen. So we're going to start by saying here, we can totally decide how to arrange this. We don't have to be stuck with how we decide to arrange it to begin with. One thing is I know this court department. We already have, you notice we didn't get prompted for court division. It's because there's a way built in to our tool to show the court division when you choose the court from a menu. We could do the same thing with the department. That's just not handled by this wizard tool yet. So I actually think I'm not even going to ask this question. So let's deal with that as our very first thing. We're not going to even bother to ask about the court department. So let's leave that on a screen called screen 1. And I'm going to not change anything else on the screen. I'm just going to skip that question so it gets dealt with, and we can deal with it later and rearrange it how we like. Now, let's think about how you would be working with somebody filling out this form. And we're just coming up with a draft way, something that we can give to our subject matter expert to get some feedback on. So let's think about how we might phrase the very first question. What would be a good thing to ask if you were trying to fill this form out? If you were trying to help someone fill it out, rather. Yeah, Christopher.
I feel like you should definitely bring forth the act and the familiarity with the act.
Okay.
So the beginning question of it is pursuant to the service member. So maybe a question relating to if the individual is familiar with the Service Member Civil Relief Act. And then if not, we would prompt maybe another page or text to that act that they can go and review, and then make another one saying, do they fully understand? I guess to kind of bring a whole to the act.
I think that's a really good thought. That's like one thing that we can do in a form like this is we can help teach someone about the law, right? Brianna, what's your experience though for how someone's filling this form out? Do you think that would help someone fill this out quickly?
If they knew what the Service Members Civil Relief Act was?
Mhm.
I mean, maybe. I think the 3 prompts are kind of straightforward. They're basically just asking like, if you are currently serving, if you're not serving, or if you're unsure. I think if they did have some knowledge of like what the service member civil relief act entailed, it would be beneficial to them, but I don't think it would necessarily change, or it shouldn't change how they answer the questions, because no matter what, they're going to be signing on the penalties of perjury.
Okay, yeah. I think that's kind of my impulse too here, is that we could probably, so one thing we're not at that point yet. I think that's a really good idea, Christopher. We're not at the point yet right here on this screen where we can make a choice like that. So what we're really thinking about is how do we group these questions? And then once we figured out how to group them, what prompts can we give in addition to the prompts that we already have that would help someone fill it in? So I think we could think of this as a couple of sections, right? We have a section of the form where we're filling in the parties and the case caption. We have a section here where we're talking about what groups each party falls into, whether currently serving, not serving, unsure. We have facts. And then we have, again, just like a signature and basic information that's the same pretty much in every form. The names of the person who's filling it in, signature date, and a BBO if they have one. So let's start with that grouping. Let's just go ahead and select all the fields that are about who's serving and put those together on one screen. And let's give the screen a title. Something like here, we could go with I would want to think about the way that this question is asked on the form, and maybe we would want to change it so it works even better for our purposes, because we can do more on a computer than you can do on a form. But for now, we're stuck with the way that these are written out, and we can rearrange it later. So this maybe would be called information about service. And I would say that's not a good title, because service in a court process has more to do with service of process. So maybe information about military service might be clear enough. Tell us what you know about each party and whether they are currently serving in the United States military. That might be a pretty good subtitle for this question, the screen, where we show all of these three fields. Three basic areas, that is, rather, they're not all fields. Yeah.
The only reason I brought that forward is because when I was reviewing the act, it also talked about state defense members. And I don't know if state defense is considered a separate group to the military, whether that might be, for example, like state police or something along those lines that are working specifically for the state. So that's why I kind of brought up the act in general.
That's a good question. So I know it does not apply to people who serve some other role for their state, but maybe what it's talking about there are like state militias, where it's not technically U.S. military, but it's run by the state and it reports to the state governor. That probably is what it is. So that's a good clarification. So United States military, or, and I'm not sure the best descriptor there, but or state militia might invoke things that are not formal, that we're not really looking for here, but it might be a fine placeholder for now. It's a good question for us to ask our subject matter expert when we get to that review point. So this seems like a pretty good group of questions to have on this screen, just these 5. It should be 6, but we forgot one of the checkboxes on the form. So let's leave it there. Click continue. Now I'm going to say, we're going to say something here about the facts that support this affidavit. So Priyana, what do you think, what would be like a normal kind of information that you might put there in this section? And then let's work backwards to the prompt that we might give to go along with this screen.
I'm just trying to make it bigger so I can read it.
And it just says here, the following facts support this affidavit.
Yeah. I cannot remember what we used to put in there.
That's okay. Yeah, let's open it up then. Let's think
I think it was something along the lines of like a search in I think there's some sort of database. If you have like a social security number and a birth date, you can look up to see if they're active on a specific date. But I forget like what other information we used to use. I remember it was like just a simple one-liner.
Okay. So maybe it'd be something like, I performed a diligent search and found no information. Something like that might be something you would type. What would be a prompt for anybody, just from what we know so far about the form? What would be a reasonable prompt to put there as the title of the screen when you run into it? So for the title for this screen, for example, is called Create a Draft of the Third Question. So what might go here in this heading of the question page?
Would it be something as simple as what facts are you using to support this affidavit? Pretty similar to what's on the PDF form.
Yeah, seems fine to me. And we do have this question about BBO, which is actually a little bit like the one about the court department. I feel like we might want to combine it with an existing screen, but we're going to leave it for now as its own question. So like maybe something like, we can just call this BBO number, this last screen here. And this is optional. So we can write our question prompt so that it makes it clear it's optional. If you're an attorney with a BBO number, please fill it in below. Might be a pretty good prompt here for this question. Okay, now we actually have the text of a DocAssemble interview that should run that we can use on this last screen. So let's download this. And I'm going to share this on the Slack channel in case you ran into a blocker as we were using it. And when we come back, I'm gonna give everybody a break. When we come back, let's just take a look at this in the DocAssemble playground. So let's come back at 3:25, give everybody a 10-minute break, and I will see you all soon. So where we left off, we had gone through the wizard and we were ready to download our form. I uploaded a copy of that onto Slack for everybody. Anybody have trouble through that part where we want us to take a minute just to look at that before we move on? Okay. All right, so what I wanted to do is let's try running what we just made. This is kind of an exciting I built fire moment often. Unless something goes wrong, then it might not be as exciting. So I'm going to switch to the DocAssemble playground. And for those of you who may not have that link handy right now, you're going to log in to this URL and then go to the playground from the drop-down list once you've signed in. So let me upload that file. So I upload the YAML file to this folder here, the YML file. And then I'm going to go to folders, templates, and make sure I've uploaded the PDF file as well. So we have two files to upload to two different parts of the playground.
So it's more than a matter of just copying all the code it generated and pasting it into Playground?
It actually is the same thing. So uploading it, just make sure that you didn't like make a mistake copying and pasting. Maybe you missed the beginning of the first line, but it does the same thing. But for the file, you do need to upload it, obviously, because you can't copy and paste the contents of the PDF. I guess there's no reason you couldn't, but that just happens to be the way it works. All right, so let's try running it and see what happens. So from that process that we just went through, we now have this running form. And there are going to be some things that are still missing or that we have to customize. It's not done yet, but we have something that we can look at and interact with. You see here, we're starting right away with some of the questions that we didn't specifically write. This question, we might not want to keep in the form actually in the long run, about whether this is helping us decide whether they're the plaintiff or the petitioner. And that actually could end up being confusing because the user of the form might not be the plaintiff or the petitioner at all. They could be an attorney representing the plaintiff or the petitioner. This one we left in as a placeholder. We don't want to always use that. Anyone look at this and see this screen here and have any ideas about how maybe like a way to make it, to improve it a bit? And that's a hard question, I know, because you may not know the full scope of things that can be improved, but.
I think right off the bat, the first thing that should be included is that they need to select at least one. It doesn't look like there's any indication that they have to select anything. So I think just making sure that obviously each one is not required, but it's required that they select at least one selection.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I like that. Yep.
And then also, could you make an if statement in the code? So like if you click on, like if there are people serving the military, then afterwards the names of the parties will pop up. Otherwise, like I feel like you don't need to see all of those like boxes on the screen at once.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Let's make it so that this is more dynamic. So it shows and hides this second box and third box if we have checked, or fourth box rather, if we've checked one of these boxes above it. I think that's a great idea. Okay, now let's just go through and just see what else we notice when we're running it through. So one thing I'm noticing is we want to get rid of this placeholder text right there, right? This seems good. Maybe we want to add more or fewer lines. We can decide. Maybe we want to change the placeholder text to a better prompt.
Yeah, maybe so the question itself is very general. The placeholder text, we could include more description of like facts to support, basically just bringing it in a little bit more narrow, basically saying like facts that support this person is part of the military or not, or you cannot determine type thing.
Perfect. Yeah, and we could even reflect back maybe what they've told us already, right? They've given us a bunch of information. We could say, tell us why so-and-so is in the military, why so-and-so is not, how you know that. But we don't have to start there. We can just start by, like, as you said, having some more guidance about how to fill this in, what kind of facts they should tell us about. Okay, and this screen, obviously some things we want to change too. What's the first thing you might want to change on this screen here? Well, let me just try clicking next and see what happens.
Maybe still keeping it required, but including in that text above it, if not applicable, please write NA, or I don't know if the code has it in it, but it has to specifically be numbers in the field. Otherwise it's not going to work, but yeah.
So somehow making it do something different if the person is not an attorney. Let's put a pin in that idea. Yeah. Okay. This prompt may not make as much sense right now, but I think that's going to be a little harder to customize. We won't touch on that yet. This prompt here, again, we don't have a lot of control over it right now, but doesn't make as much sense. I said it was the plaintiff, so it's asking me what court do I want to file in. But of course, this is not ever the first or only document that you file in a case. So it doesn't make as much sense. We really want to say what court is this case already in. But we're not going to be able to change that prompt right now, or we won't want to. Just that's actually something we're working on the back end of our code to make it more flexible for this type of form. And you'll notice here, like one of the things that we've done in our project is we've made it so that this list is dynamic based on the address they gave us. That's actually not very helpful for this form. It's kind of a funny situation. We don't really care where the attorney lives to figure out what court they can file in. Maybe it's a little bit helpful, but probably not that helpful. They're probably going to almost always want to get something like this list here, which is all of the trial courts. But maybe we want to let them filter it. One kind of input we could use is one where they start typing and it shows them a narrowed list of options based on the type, what they've typed. So like if they typed in Plymouth, it would show all of the Plymouth courts. That might be helpful for someone to fill it in quickly. But probably getting a list of courts where are near where they live is not very helpful for an attorney helping a plaintiff file a case that they already had a forced choice of forum. So, all right. We can probably skip this question here. There's always going to be a docket number. I don't know why all right. I answered no, even though it doesn't really make sense. And let's just go through here quickly. And there are a bunch of questions that are placeholders, basically, that are therein for us to customize if we need to, but should work without our customization. And we get this behavior of a preview screen, a signature prompt.
Can I ask a quick question? It had a preview and it showed the PDF. Is that why we had to upload the PDF to show that preview a couple of screens back?
Not just because of the preview, but because we're actually filling in that form. So it needs to, it's actually communicating with the form to get it filled in the right way. So at the end, output and the preview for both parts.
Sure, okay.
Yeah. So we can look at it and see, and there are a couple of things I've already noticed when I was playing around with this before. So one thing is we're not getting the names of the plaintiff and defendant. So those should be filled in. But everything else looks pretty good. Look, what we filled in pretty much shows up. Although we know that this checkbox is missing too. All right, so let's look at this just for a second and take a peek at what's going on in the file. And let's try making one of those changes. And then I want to let you, I am conscious of like how helpful it is to just talk with each other and practice some of these skills. And I never give enough time. So we have about 10 minutes left. Those are all really good ideas that we had for how to improve this form. I think some of you are going to keep doing stuff with DocAssemble. We might reserve some time towards the end of the semester to help do some of the stuff together, but I don't want to make everybody learn all of the skills. Let's just take this form and everyone take like 5 to a little bit less than 10 minutes so we can circle back in and answer questions to practice by, first of all, let's try finding something that we wanted to change. So we could try typing, for example, the word placeholder in the search box till we find, it's case sensitive. So we could keep searching till we find some text we wanted to change and improve it. So I know we wanted to change this question here. What facts are you using to support this affidavit? So why don't you just practice that skill in your breakout rooms? Try changing the wording of the screen and get it to show something more like what you want.